All right, so you wanted to understand Mark Zuckerberg's vision of the future. Well, you gave us a great interview with Cleo-Abram to dive into. Get ready for holograms, AI that knows you better than you know yourself, and some thought-provoking questions about what it all means for human connection.
It really is fascinating how Zuckerberg lays out this vision of the future where tech isn't just about convenience anymore, it's about changing how we interact with the world.
Totally, and he kicks things off by showing Cleo these prototype augmented reality glasses. I mean, he called them the real-life Tony Stark glasses, so who wouldn't be excited? But it's not just cool tech, is it? I mean, he spent like a decade on this, and he seems convinced that this is the next big thing, like smartphones after desktops.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that he doesn't think these glasses will replace everything else.
Right.
He imagines all kinds of devices, like simple glasses that work with AI, heads-up displays, and eventually full-blown holographic AR experiences. He even talks about the more affordable VR headsets like the Quest 3.
Oh, yeah.
So he's thinking about accessibility too.
Like a whole interconnected ecosystem. So it's like stepping into a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
But he keeps coming back to these two big ideas, presence and,
Personalized AI.
yes, personalized AI.
Yeah, presence is all about bridging that gap between physical distance and making you feel like you're with someone, even if they're miles away. And then personalized AI, powered by models like Llama, Meta's own language model, is about having an AI that's so in tune with you, it can predict what you need.
Like a super smart assistant, right?
Exactly.
One that learns from everything you do.
Exactly.
And he doesn't avoid the elephant in the room either. The fact that real-world social connection is declining.
Right.
Cleo even talks about, wishing she could just hug her mom.
Yeah.
I think we can all relate to that.
Yeah, for sure.
But can technology really solve loneliness, or is it part of the problem?
Well, Zuckerberg seems to think it can be part of the solution. He admits that replicating physical touch, like an actual hug, is still a huge challenge, but they're making progress. He even mentions this demo where you can actually feel a ping pong ball hitting your paddle in VR.
Wow.
But some things, like smell, are probably a long way off.
Yeah, I can't imagine wanting to smell everything of a virtual world.
Right.
But even if we can't perfectly recreate the feeling of being there in person, physically, Zuckerberg seems to think that these technologies can still create a stronger sense of connection with people who are far away. It makes you wonder if those virtual hugs might become, the standard someday.
Yeah, it's a fascinating possibility, but it does raise a lot of questions, too.
For sure.
Like, what happens to our relationships in the real world if we're spending more and more time in these virtual spaces?
Right.
And how do we ensure that this tech makes our lives better instead of making us more isolated?
Yeah, it's a tough balance.
Yeah, for sure.
And speaking of balance, Zuckerberg talks about AI beyond just social connection for things like education and creative work, too.
Yeah, he describes a whole spectrum of AI applications,
Right.
from tools that make things easier, like real-time translation, to things where struggling is actually important for learning, like being able to express your emotions clearly.
Okay.
So it seems like he's trying to figure out how to use this incredibly powerful tool without making us overly reliant on it.
That's a good point. He even brings up his own kids as an example. He says they sometimes have trouble expressing their feelings, and AI could help them find the right words. But then it makes you think, would that actually help them learn and grow, or would it just make them less able to handle those emotions on their own?
It's a valid point. If we always depend on AI to solve our problems, are we missing out on developing our own resilience? It's something to think about as this technology gets more advanced.
Definitely. And then we get into this whole debate about open source.
Oh, yeah.
Zuckerberg is a big advocate for it, making the AI models accessible for anyone to use and modify. He sees it as a contrast to the more closed-off approach of companies like Google and OpenAI. And what's interesting is that he argues that open source is safer because you have more people looking at the code, more people to find and fix problems. But I do wonder about the risks of that approach.
Yeah, you've got a point there. So he's basically contrasting his open and collaborative approach with what he calls the centralized approach of Google and OpenAI. And his big argument for open source is that transparency makes things safer.
Okay.
If you've got lots of people checking the code, then you're more likely to spot bugs or security risks before someone can exploit them.
That makes sense. But doesn't open source also mean that basically anyone could access this technology, even people with bad intentions?
That's true. It's a bit of a balancing act.
Yeah.
Zuckerberg acknowledges that risk, but he points out that open source software has a good track record.
Right.
Historically, it's actually been more secure than closed systems. He thinks that the collective intelligence of the open source community outweighs the potential dangers.
So like a giant group project where hopefully the good guys win.
Right, exactly.
It's a gamble for sure, but it sounds like Zuckerberg believes that being open and transparent is the best way to ensure that AI develops in a way that's good for everyone. Almost like a digital democracy, right?
Yeah, a fascinating idea.
Yeah,
It brings up all sorts of questions about how we control this technology, how we regulate it.
right.
But before we go too deep on that, I think it's worth remembering that the whole future of open source AI and AI in general is tied to this big question that Zuckerberg keeps bringing up.
Uh-huh.
Will AI continue to evolve at this incredible speed?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Literally, it really
Literally.
is.
It seems like everything Zuckerberg's doing, the infrastructure he's building, the whole open source thing, it all hinges on the idea that AI will just keep getting smarter and more integrated into our lives. But what if he's wrong?
That's the cliffhanger he leaves us with. It's a question with huge implications, not just for Meta, but for the whole world.
Yeah?
If AI hits a wall, then everything we've talked about could change completely. But if it keeps growing at this rate, well, then we could be talking about a future that's even more mind-blowing than anything we can imagine right now.
That's a wild thought and honestly kind of scary. It really highlights how important all these questions are.
Definitely.
So before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, what are your gut feelings on all this?
Yeah, what excites you about the possibilities? What are you worried about?
Keep those thoughts in mind because in the next part we'll explore some of the challenges and ethical questions that even Zuckerberg admits we need to face. So we've talked about how Zuckerberg sees this future where tech is really woven into our lives, from how we work to how we connect with people we care about.
Yeah.
But it's not all, perfect and easy, is it? Cleo definitely brings up some of the worries that come with this fast pace of change.
Yeah, one thing that really stands out is that Cleo, who's usually pretty optimistic about tech, admits to feeling a little anxious about how these advancements might change the way we communicate. She's worried about feeling swept up in this wave of innovation that we don't really understand, and I think a lot of people share that feeling.
It's like we're on this train that's speeding towards a future we can't even picture clearly, and we don't know if we want to get off or not.
Yeah.
So how does Zuckerberg address these concerns?
Well, he acknowledges the anxiety, especially for creators like Cleo, whose work is directly affected by these changes.
Right.
But instead of dismissing those fears, he really emphasizes adapting and staying curious.
Okay.
He believes that people who embrace the new tools will be the ones who do well.
So it's not about resisting change, it's about learning to surf.
Exactly.
That makes sense, but it's definitely easier said than done, right? I mean, some of this stuff feels like something from a science fiction movie.
He actually compares it to the early days of the internet and smartphones.
Okay.
Those were really disruptive too, but we figured out how to use them in good ways.
Right.
His point is that technology will always keep changing, and we need to be flexible and open to new things.
It's like learning a whole new language,
Yeah.
except this one could change the rules of reality.
Exactly.
It's kind of intimidating.
Yeah.
So remember when Cleo asks him for advice on how to prepare for this future?
Oh, yeah.
His answer was surprisingly simple.
It was.
Yeah.
He says it all comes down to staying curious.
Okay.
That constant desire to learn, to explore, to understand, those are the most valuable things you can have in this ever-changing world.
So don't just take things at face value, right?
Right.
Question everything. Dig deeper.
Exactly.
Which is what we're doing here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he also encourages people to be critical thinkers.
Yes.
Don't just focus on the good things about new technologies, but think about the downsides too.
Right.
He says not all progress is necessarily good, which brings us back to the whole debate about open source and its role in the future of AI.
Yeah.
Zuckerberg is really passionate about this. He really believes that open source, where anyone can access the AI models, will lead to a more diverse and stronger AI landscape.
Right.
He thinks it's safer because you have more people checking the code, looking for problems.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there are risks to that approach too.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
He contrasts his vision, which is more open and collaborative, with what he calls the centralized approach of companies like Google and OpenAI.
Uh-huh.
And his whole argument for open source comes down to the idea that transparency means better security.
Okay.
More people scrutinizing the code means more chances to catch bugs and vulnerabilities before they can cause any harm.
Right, that makes sense. But doesn't open source mean that anyone could get access to this technology? I mean, even people who might want to use it for bad things. It seems like there's a trade-off there between innovation and control.
That's the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
Zuckerberg knows about that risk, but he talks about the history of open source software.
Right.
It's actually proven to be more secure than closed systems. He believes that the collective intelligence of all those people working together is more powerful than the risks posed by a few individuals with bad intentions.
So like a giant collaborative experiment, we're hoping the wisdom of the crowd prevails.
Exactly.
It's a big gamble.
It is.
But it seems like Zuckerberg's willing to bet on the idea that being open and transparent is the best way to ensure that AI is developed in a way that benefits all of us. It's almost like a digital democracy.
That's a fascinating way to think about it.
Right.
It does make you think about how we would govern and regulate this technology.
Yeah, it does.
But before we get too sidetracked, I think it's important to remember that the future of open source AI and AI in general really depends on that big question that Zuckerberg keeps coming back to.
Uh-huh.
Will AI keep evolving at this incredible rate?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question. Literally.
Yes.
It seems like everything he's doing, the investments, the open source, it all assumes that AI will keep advancing at this breakneck speed. But what if he's wrong?
That's what he leaves us hanging with.
Right.
It's a question that has huge implications, not just for Meta, but for the world.
For sure.
If AI development slows down, then we might see a shift to more focused AI applications,
Okay.
maybe even a return to a more human-centered approach to solving problems.
Interesting.
But if AI keeps growing, then we might be looking at a future that's completely different from anything we can imagine right now.
It's both exciting and kind of terrifying, right?
Definitely.
It makes all these discussions even more important.
It does.
So before we get to the last part of this deep dive, what are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, what excites you about the possibilities? What makes you hesitant?
Hold on to those thoughts, because in the last part, we'll look at some of the potential problems and ethical considerations that even Zuckerberg acknowledges we need to think about. All right, so we've covered a lot in our deep dive into Zuckerberg's vision of the future, from those holographic glasses to AI that's practically a mind reader.
Yeah, it really seems like he's putting his money where his mouth is when it comes to a future where tech is everywhere.
Right, but even with all this excitement, there's this one big question that just keeps coming up, a question that even Zuckerberg seems to be wrestling with.
Yeah, he kind of leaves us with this cliffhanger.
Right.
Will AI keep evolving at this crazy fast rate, or will it hit some sort of limit?
And it's not just a theoretical question either.
Right.
I mean, Zuckerberg's talking about investing hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure, basically building the foundation for a future where AI just keeps getting smarter and faster.
Yeah, like he's going all in on this one outcome.
Exactly. And it's not hard to see why he's so focused on this, right? I mean, if AI does keep growing at this speed, we're talking about a world where machines could actually become smarter than humans in a lot of ways.
It really makes you think about what it even means to be human in a world like that.
Yeah, like where do we fit in if machines can do so much better than us?
It's a pretty fundamental question, and what's interesting is that Zuckerberg doesn't pretend to have all the answers.
Right.
He admits that AI might hit a plateau, that it might not be this unlimited force that just keeps evolving forever,
Okay.
but he's clearly betting that it will.
It's a high-stakes gamble, to say the least.
Yeah, it is.
And it's not just Meta's future that's riding on this.
Definitely not.
I mean, the answer to this question has huge implications for all of us.
Absolutely. Think about it. The future of work, education, healthcare, even things like warfare could all be shaped by how AI develops.
Right. If AI hits a wall, we might see a shift towards more specialized AI, maybe even a return to a more human-centered approach.
Right.
But if AI keeps growing, then we're talking about a future that's just completely different from anything we've ever known.
Yeah, it's both exciting and kind of scary at the same time.
Totally. Which is why it's so important to have these conversations, to really think about both the good and the bad that could come from this technology.
It's a call to action for all of us. We can't just sit back and watch this happen. We need to be engaged and think critically about how we want AI to be a part of our lives.
Right? Zuckerberg might be optimistic, but ultimately it's up to us to shape this future. So as we wrap up this deep dive, think about what really stood out to you. What parts of this possible future excite you? What parts make you nervous?
Yeah, what role do you want AI to play in your life and in the world?
Those are the questions we all need to be asking, because the decisions we make today are going to create the world of tomorrow. And that world could be one where AI is a force for good, or one where its power is misused. It's been fascinating exploring all of this with you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Mark Zuckerberg's vision of the future. We hope it's given you some things to think about and maybe even spark some conversations of your own. Keep exploring and keep learning. Until next time.